thank God that Dad had cancer, because had he died in a car wreck, I don't know what my viewpoint would have been or how crushed I would have been or if I'd even been able to function afterward. But for 10 months, we knew the end date was coming. We knew after the Whipple surgery failed on New Year's Eve, we knew there was no way that this cancer would ever be eradicated from his pancreas, that it was impossible. God was going to take him on one day, and we just didn't know when. So every moment had to matter.
What's going on, guys? My name is Ryan Snod. It rhymes with odd, and you're listening and watching the Rhymes with Odd podcast. Today, we're jumping in the studio with another amazing guest. We got Jeff Lucas in the podcast studio. Jeff, welcome in.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So Jeff is actually, I would say, a older brother of a childhood classmate of mine growing up.
Yeah.
We've probably crossed paths many times in the last 30 years, but currently, you just came back to Iowa, and I think that'll be a really fun conversation talking about your journey with the rodeo, working in the nonprofit space, ag, all the stuff that goes into it. So really excited about our conversation today.
No, I'm excited.
Okay, so for the people that don't know who you are, who is Jeff Lucas? What's like the 3 to 5 minute version of who you are and what you do?
Gosh, yeah, I'm a father, husband. I married my high school sweetheart. I'm a son of good people, grew up in small town USA like you, and just hardworking, devoted to God and trying to make a difference in the world and trying to lead with a servant heart in everything we do, whether it be in the nonprofit space, the rodeo space, or just getting groceries at Hy-Vee. It's all about making a difference every day for somebody else in life.
That's perfect. And we'll definitely dig into kind of your ethos and what makes you who you are with family things and your religion, as you mentioned, and other things that make you who you are, because I think it's a huge piece of what brought you where you are in life today. So for the people that don't know, let's talk about your current role, because you just stepped into a new executive director role with a nonprofit here in Iowa, which is how we got reconnected. We were shooting some videos together. But tell the people kind of like what you do for work right now. Yeah,
so I'm the executive director for the Iowa Ag Water Alliance. It's a 10-year-old nonprofit organization that was founded at kind of the height of nutrient reduction talk in the world of Iowa and agriculture. And we were founded a decade ago. My predecessor, Sean McMahon, did a really good job of building this nonprofit through different programs and grants and different projects that are funded through the USDA, Iowa Department of Land Stewardship and Agriculture, IDALs we call them, and different other funding sources to be able to pay farmers to do better work for the environment around us and for clean water. So I get to carry that flag forward. We have an amazing team. We're founded by Iowa soybean, Iowa corn growers, and Iowa pork producers. So we're kind of the melting pot of all three great commodity groups that are here to make a difference. When it comes to water quality, they tap IAWA to make that difference.
That's perfect. And where are you guys based out of?
So we're home based at the Iowa Soybean Association office in Ankeny, but our board is Iowa corn, Iowa soy, and Iowa pork. So we work for all three of the commodity groups and then their board of directors, because they're all three nonprofits as well. But we touch all 99 counties in the state of Iowa.
That's cool. Yeah, because it's right by the district, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was going to say, my wife, Paige, she works in the district. Her salon's on the second level. It's in the Dolce Vita suites.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm there all the time if I get my hair cut or whatever. So, very cool. So I think, and this will be an interesting piece, because a lot of people think, I want to be a CEO or an executive director or the president of a company or like the leader of something. Yeah. What does your typical workload look like, and what are some of the things you have to do in that executive director role? Yeah,
so it changes, I think, because I've been in leadership at different organizations. This one, it's really learning curve heavy. Obviously, I'm married to an agronomist who works for USDA and has since we've been married. But I don't know the inner workings and the different practices and techniques that make conservation happen on the ground. So me taking this role, I've had to learn a lot in the last 5 to 6 months of getting up to speed on what all our farmers are doing and how they are making a difference every day, and whether it be cover crops or saturated buffers buffers or bioreactors and all these fancy terms that when I started, I had no idea what they meant or what they did. Getting up to speed with that has been kind of the controlling arm of my calendar. We've got a pretty small team, had a lot of turnover before I got there. So rebuilding capacity and being able to ensure our partners that we're able to make good on the obligations that we've set out for. Reorchestrating how our recording process works for match guarantees from partners, different things. So that way we're always audit ready. Being a nonprofit, it's at the top of mind every day for me that our financials are in order. We're taking care of everything. And more than anything, we serve the farmers. The farmers pay for IAWA through checkoff. So every day we wake up, we think about water quality in Iowa, and we think about how to champion a farmer or educate a farmer to better water quality for all Iowans.
No, I love it. And we'll definitely talk about it more in a second of kind of the things you guys are pushing and the challenges in that area. But before we do, I kind of want to jump into your backstory. So we mentioned we're both from the Fort Madison area. That's how we met each other. But I think you have an interesting come-up story because you're not like you were, I would say, like a townie. Like you grew up in town, and now like you're thrust in this world of like just being out in nature and ag and the rodeo and the whole like that whole world. So let's talk about kind of where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? And kind of what was your origin story?
Yeah, so you're right. I'm growing up in smack dab in the middle of Fort Madison, which I consider a small town because I've lived next to some pretty big cities now. But growing up, it was all about baseball and riding our bikes around the neighborhoods. And I was fortunate enough, about 7 houses down the street from where I grew up was an older couple, Pete and Rocky Mankey, that kind of instilled a lot of good values into me. Pete was a war vet and was drafted into the war, and I got to spend pretty much every evening of my childhood on their front porch eating a half bag of stale popcorn and listening to the Cardinals play on a little radio with an antenna 6 foot long. And that's what really built me into who I am as a human. I grew up through Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and did all that kind of stuff. And agriculture and rodeo, obviously Fort Madison is a very, very well-respected rodeo and a Hall of Fame rodeo now. And I got to see that 1 week a year. I got to kind of get a peek into what my future was going to be, what I wanted it to be, and got to hang out with guys like Leon Coffey and Eddie Hatfield and Rick Chapman and the guys that they didn't have to spend time with me, but they did. And now I get to be their colleague and get to see them across the country and shake their hand. And
what was your, and not to cut you off, what was your first rodeo experience? Because I'm just curious. I mean, with it, there had to be some like earth-shaking experience. You're like, I want to do this for a living.
And I think it was just the like little spurs, like every other kid down there, that every kid, if you grew up in Southeast Iowa, you got on a sheep at one point in time on Labor Day. And that was like the start of it. Back then, Leon and Eddie, the bullfighters and rodeo clowns, would be at little spurs because their schedules allowed them to be. So I remember being probably 4 or 5 years old and getting to meet Leon for the first time and just being around the infectious laugh and smile and the joy that those guys brought to everyone around them. And instantly it was like, I got to be that guy. So that kind of transformed me into putting on makeup and baggies and fighting sheep, and then growing up into fighting bulls and that sort of thing. But it's all about being involved in the rodeo community. It's been such a blessing to us, and we've gotten a paid vacation for however many years now to go all over this country and see some amazing things and meet some amazing people, but share the Western way of life with everybody else. I remember we used to stand, and we lived in the middle of town, but we had a squirrel feeder on the tree, and we had ropes that Mom had bought at a yard sale somewhere, and we would rope the squirrel feeder, and we thought we were at the National Finals Rodeo, and we were doing big things. And it was being 6 foot high on a tree is not really conclusive to roping a calf, but we really thought we were doing something special. So it instilled a passion for me and a love for this way of life. And every little bit of freedom I got growing up, I just poured back into the rodeo business or learning more and meeting new people so that way I could have this life as an adult.
That's perfect. Well, and remind me how you're one of how many siblings and the family makeup of how, because I only know Jeffin because he's your brother who was in my grade. So that was my connection to you.
Yeah. So I've got 2 older siblings. I've got one that passed away. So 3 older siblings. One passed away as a baby that I never got to meet. They're both still in Fort Madison. I have kids that come up through school at Fort Madison. Then my little brother, Jeffin, that you grew up with. So we had a pretty full house and a pretty small home, but a full house, no doubt.
Sure. So you're growing up, or you're kind of been introduced a little bit to the rodeo side of it. Walk me through like the high school years as you're kind of preparing to leave to go start your adult career and your life out of high school.
So it was high school was spent a lot of times, and I met my wife freshman year of high school. So a lot of my high school years were poured into courting her and making sure she didn't run away, because I knew that was the woman I wanted to marry, and I invested a lot into that relationship. Mom and Dad did a great job of the last $20 they had spent for gas to get us to Ainsworth to the halfway point to swap, and I'd get in my wife's car and we'd go to Iowa City and spend the weekend, and they made a point to invest in that. Now as an adult, I look back and say, man, that was pretty impressive that they did that for a 10th grader in high school. But they saw, I think, the future on the wall, that was going to be the marriage that was going to be, and they wanted to invest in that at an early age. So spent a lot of time in Iowa City with my then girlfriend. Spent a lot of time in choir. I thought choir was kind of my niche and where I was going to go. I sang in choir at Iowa State my freshman year, but I thought choir was what was going to take me far in life, whether it be from the stage or in studio, whatever that was. I just love singing old classical music that we'd sing in choir class. So spent a lot of time doing that, and then all my free time was consumed by rodeo and learning about it. And that was when internet was just starting to pop off, and we had these little things called Blackberries, and you could get on the internet and you could Google something through a web browser and wait 10 minutes for the page to load. So I kind of knew who won where and what was going on. So it was a way to connect to the outside life that Iowa really doesn't get to experience, especially in our neck of the woods. Doesn't get to experience that level of rodeo very often. So spent a lot of time pouring into that and refining, figuring out. Fighting bulls was my passion. So we traveled all across the Midwest fighting bulls at little podunk rodeos. And I remember working an event behind a bar in Hillsboro, Iowa, which most people would have no idea where that's at. I probably couldn't even find it today, but we were there. And little things like that I got to fulfill my dream for those 2 hours or whatever it was, and it was an easy way to make some money. So I could go and work a rodeo on a weekend and make $300. Well, that was a pretty good check at high school age. And I could give that to mom and dad to pay the light bill and keep gas in the truck and stuff like that. So it was a way of fulfilling my dream, but also making an actual living. I worked at an after-school program in high school too that paid $7.25 an hour, and wasn't nearly the checks size that I was getting from rodeoing. And kind of told the story right there and you can make easy money as long as you didn't get hurt.
Sure. No, I love it. And you mentioned like kind of growing up, like you said, money wasn't easy to come by at some of the different times in your life. How did that kind of steer your career path to do? Because a lot of people, if they grow up that way, you're just do whatever pays well, and you're going to be miserable your whole life, and then maybe you'll enjoy life for the last 10, 15 years of your life when you retire, and then if you even make it that far. So what was kind of that relationship as you were looking for like your career path to do something that got you out of that kind of living situation, but also gave you a chance to chase some passion there?
Sure. And I think a lot of it goes back to, like, I remember getting personal loans with mom and dad where we'd take the car up to Case Bind Credit Union and they'd look over the car and we would wait for the underwriters to come back and give us a loan for Christmas. And that was always wrong to me. It felt wrong. And it's nothing. My folks were not educated well on finances is the biggest issue of my childhood, and why we went through the struggles we went through. As my older siblings were in high school, college ages, my dad was co-signing on loans he shouldn't have been. Next thing you know, a couple repos later, and your credit is in the dumps, and you're having to get loans for Christmas presents. And layaway was like the greatest day in the world. And I think I realized really young that life didn't have to be that way. You didn't have to rely on the next paycheck or making the next Friday be the greatest day of the month because that's when you could get groceries. My dad was a senior engineer at Case New Holland. He made decent money, but he always had a second and a third job because we just never were ahead. And it was all about choices, decisions that they had made, whether it be to co-sign or not pay on this loan for mom and dad or whatever it was, those decisions. I grew up in a house full of smoke and alcohol too. And those were two things that were always around, even though sometimes we didn't have enough to keep the lights on or whatever. Those were choices that were made. And I got to see it as a kid that those are choices I'm not going to make. I'm always going to be ahead of the 8 ball. And everything in life is you're taught a lesson. And if you reflect enough, you can use that lesson to get you farther ahead. So everything I've done, my degree's in elementary education, but I've never taught. Now, there's principle and value reasons why I never went into the education system, but it also doesn't pay enough for the difference I want to make. And I want to be able to not worry about the next paycheck or whatever it is. I want to give. I want to be a philanthropist. And that is my end goal in life. I want to die and somebody say that guy made a difference with his time, energy, and his money. And that's the end goal. But you only get there by working really hard today and working multiple jobs. I think a lot of 20-year-olds get caught up in partying and what kind of shoes they wear and all these different things that mean nothing to the 40-year-old them. When I was in my early 20s, I really struggled finding work and finding kind of traction of the hustle. But through time, I grew to figuring out how do you make your passion pay you? And then you never work a day in your life and you're making a difference. And for me, I can work 3 jobs at all times and never worry about, gosh, dang, I'm so burnt out. I truly love everything that I do, and it pays me well for it because I'm passionate about it. I love what I do, and I make sure that if I'm giving my time to it, it needs to pay the price because that's time I'm giving up with my wife and daughter.
Sure. No, I love it. And I think it really does. It's one or the other, right? You either do what you saw growing up or you go 180. I feel like there's no real
100%.
in between. Because I've had that a lot with just people I've interviewed for the show, but also just in my own experiences, you see people that are either making all the wrong choices in life, but they're just doing what they saw when they were young, or they had a really stable home life, and for whatever reason, they just decided to burn it down. They're just like, I'm just gonna choose chaos today. So,
and I think you can be a product of your environment in 2 different ways. And that growing up, I could have went down a very dark path with the finances and the alcohol and all those things. But I was a product of my environment. I got to see it from the reflection side and say, that's not who I want to be or what I want to do or what I want to give to my family. That's why we don't drink, we don't smoke, we don't chew, we don't do any of the worldly things that we were taught we probably should do to enjoy life. I love Fort Madison. I could never live back in Fort Madison again. I think there's a culture change in different places around the country. I've seen it in Idaho and Oregon. I've seen it in Tennessee and Alabama, and I've seen it in Southeast Iowa, that there's a difference in culture of the people that work hard, own the businesses. They get shunned as being, oh, those are the rich people. No, they're not. They didn't just happen upon wealth. They worked and they grinded and they poured everything into their business, and they were able to provide for their family. I hate when people say, oh, well, they're just spoiled by their parents. I don't know about you, but I'm going to do everything I can to give my daughter the best life she can have because I've earned that asset or those dollars to be able to pour back into her. And I think there's a lot of folks that the victim mentality I grew up around a lot of and refuse to have that outlook on life for me and my family. And we're just going to push forward and we're going to do whatever we've got to do to be successful.
Sure. No, I think it's a great perspective. I similarly with myself, I'm like, I love, or I enjoyed growing up where we did, but I couldn't see myself living there just for that same kind of thing. It's especially like I would say like the Mount Rushmore of Fort Madison, the families that are like the big well-known folks. It's usually like 3, 4, 5 generations of people working their face off to get where, someone took it over, and like people just see, oh, they've got this or that. And it's like, you don't understand, like usually if it's the dad that started the company, like yes, the family's doing well, but he's never home.
Yeah,
He's always
you
working.
didn't see him at baseball games and basketball games because he was grinding. He was doing whatever it took to sacrifice for his family. And I think down there that gets kind of poo pooed a lot of, oh well, they've got the nice cars and they live up on the hill and whatever. It's like, God, that's who I want to be. I want to work that hard. I want to have those opportunities, and opportunity only comes with hard work. And those pillared families, the Mount Rushmore is a perfect way to put it. Those people have earned every bit that they've got, and they deserve to keep it. And praise God that they stay in Fort Madison because they employ most of that community.
Right.
I would love to find a way to start a business in Fort Madison and employ people. That would be a big goal of mine. But those families have stayed there. They could have moved to the city. They could have went anywhere. They could have bought the jets and done the fancy stuff. But they've stayed true to that community, and they invest in it every day by employing the local folks that when a factory goes under, they absorb them and they bring them into their company. And that's admirable. That's something I want to do.
No, I love it. Yeah, and I think it's super interesting perspective because, yeah, similarly, I want to do well for my family, but it's also not a greed. I think that there's a big difference there is like you can want to like really do well in your business or in your career and not just for the monetary gain, but it's like challenge yourself. And then the more value you provide, the more you get paid. So it's a direct relation of like, for the most part, if you're paid very well, you're making a huge impact, you know? So I think it's a big piece there. Before we finish up with your childhood, I know there's a huge life-altering event that happened that really shaped you into the man you are today, which was your father passing away. Let's talk about where you were in life before that event happened and then kind of the events leading up to before he passed away.
Yeah, so growing up, as I mentioned, alcohol and tobacco were a big thing in our house. Cub Scouts really changed my family. I'll never forget getting a piece of paper and taking it to Dad and saying, I want to become a Tiger Cub. And we went to, I think it was Old Settlers Park, and we met a gentleman there, and there's a few other families, and we were the last people to leave because we helped clean up, and Dad and this gentleman had very deep conversation about Dad's history with Boy Scouts. And I saw a new fire lit in him that I'd not seen before in my life. And Dad ended up becoming the Scoutmaster and the Boy Scout leaders and having that impact on the community, and started pushing the bottles away and the cans away. And we weren't spending time at the Old English anymore. We were spending time in a church basement pouring into the youth. And Mom was the Tiger Scout club leader, I guess is what they'd call it.
She was my Tiger Cub Scout leader.
For like over a decade. Yep. And it was just every Tuesday night at 6 o'clock or whatever. That's where we were. So got to grow up and got to see the values of what Scouts was and how you poured into the troop from Hope Haven when we go to camp together. And we got to see so many different avenues that we weren't able to see from inside of Fort Madison. And that was a blessing that it really changed life and got Dad to where he didn't want to be seen as the guy that was at the bar or the guy that drank all the time or needed a beer to wind down after work. He wanted to be seen as the guy that led the Scouts to having record popcorn sales so that we could benefit the camp and all the kids in the area. And he wanted to instill in them and have something that made a difference in the community. And that really changed everything. As I said, I met my wife my freshman year of high school, so my idea of getting an Eagle Scout kind of went to the back door when I found this pretty lady in Iowa City and thought, that's who I'm going to marry, and I need to invest in her, and I need to chase this. So Dad and I kind of grew apart a good bit because
this was like freshman year of high school?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, because I really disappointed him, and it is something I do regret, was not getting the Eagle Scout. Dad never did get his Eagle Scout, and I think he wanted Jeff and I to get ours as like, hey, this will set you up and get you farther in life with an easier life and into adulthood. And I turned it down to go chase this girl. And at the end, it was the greatest thing that ever happened when she said goodbye to him for the last time and flew to Idaho the day before he died. It was like, yeah, I made the right choice because Dad got a daughter out of the deal. He didn't get an Eagle Scout, but he got a daughter. And that made all the difference for me. I still regret not getting my Eagle Scout. I wish I would have stayed hooked and made him proud that way, but I think I'm making him proud in other ways. So through high school, we kind of distanced and kind of fought. He really didn't buy into the rodeo, being a cowboy idea that I had for myself in life. I think he would admit he would be shocked that I make the kind of income I do and I get to travel and see the places I do through rodeo now that he didn't see when I was a kid. And that's a lesson for me to say, if Emmy Lou wants to do anything in this world, if she wants to be a ballerina, we're going to find out who the best ballerina is and invest. And if she wants to play tennis, we're going to find the best tennis teacher to pour into her, because I didn't have that as much. And it was a monetary thing, but also he had his doubts, and it showed to me as a kid. And that changed how hard I ran towards that to prove him wrong. Obviously, and through high school, I'd chase the girl and choir and rodeo and was good in school and got good grades and everything. But I was pretty well looking at life after Fort Madison and after high school, from my sophomore year of high school, to think, what am I going to do and how am I going to do it? So my wife and I moved to Ames. My girlfriend and I at the time moved to Ames and moved into family housing in an apartment. Which is really funny. It was kind of this big city moment of like, holy crap, I'm in a big town with a whole bunch of people. And the first people we met when we moved in was our middle school music teacher, Miss Stevenson. So when she like walks out of her building, she's like, Jeff? I'm like, Miss Stevenson? And her husband was there getting a PhD or something. And it was cool. It was like, okay, we're home. We're settled in. And we spent 4 years in that apartment of grinding out. My wife is 2 years older than me. She's a cougar. So
Love it.
she spent her 2 years after high school going to Kirkwood and getting her AAs done. And then we
you
moved
said she grew up in Iowa City?
She was a military baby, so she grew up in Germany and Dover, Delaware, and San Antonio, and kind of all over the world. But Iowa City, if you ask her, Iowa City is where she grew up.
Sure.
And grew up just northeast of town in the country. But we moved to Iowa State together. She got 2 degrees and a minor. I barely squeaked through 1 degree, and she was my rock through everything. But the third week of college at Iowa State, Dad that summer through orientation had a lot of pains and different things that we couldn't figure out what was going on. And I never forget being at orientation at Iowa State, and his credit card was denied 3 times, or his debit cards, 3 different cards were denied to get the dorm room that we were supposed to sleep in that night. And I just so happened to have a Lee County Bank debit card of my own and paid for the dorm rooms that night. And it was extremely hurtful to him to have to be seen that way, and that I had to cover the tab. And that night he was talking about, when we were sleeping in a dorm room, we're on dorm beds, and it's not real nice for a guy 6'3" and 250 pounds. It wasn't a comfortable night for him. And I remember him talking about how he had just pain in his stomach and his abdomen, and he'd roll over and he tossed and turned all night long. And we got done, went through orientation. Everything was good. We walked by Lake Luzerne. I think that's the name of it, Lake Luzerne. Or Lake Laverne.
Yep.
Saw some people fishing. That was instantly like, yep, you're going here. This is the place. And we drove home, got home. It was a couple weeks later he went in. They thought it was his gallbladder. So they took his gallbladder out. He still had a whole bunch of pains, could not figure out what the deal was. And my dad was a stoic man. He never seen him cry until he was diagnosed with cancer. And he had lived a pretty rough life and had some rough times through life. I won't say he lived a rough life. Had some rough times in life where he should have broke down, and he never did. He always stayed strong. And through that pain and the uncertainty and everything else, he just kept charging on. He went to work every day. He was still leading Boy Scouts and doing all the things, trying to pour into the youth. And the third week of college, Dad had gone back to Iowa City, and they did some scans and stuff, and they found out that he had a tumor in his bile duct of his pancreas. So I'll never forget, I got out of Sci Ride at McKay Hall. I was walking to Special Ed 250. Dr. Pat Carlson was the professor, and Mom called, and cell phones were still a new thing back then. I think I had a track phone. So minutes are are pretty priceless. And Mom called and she said, "Hey, we've got some news. What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm headed to class. What's up?" She said, "Dad has stage 4 pancreatic cancer." And my world stopped. I'll never forget. The person in front of me was wearing a red sweatshirt. That's how much I remember that moment. And it felt like everything in my life had just ended because my rock and the guy that, even though I'd grown a little bit distant from, was now about to face the biggest battle of his life. At that time, I didn't know what a pancreas was. I didn't know what it did, and I didn't know how to spell it. I walked into my special ed 250 course. It's a big lecture hall. And I walked up to Dr. Pat Carlson and I said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but my mom just called and said Dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and I feel like I should go to Iowa City." And Dr. Carlson said, "Give me your phone." She called the dean and she called Cheryl Lindholm, my advisor, and excused me for that week. And she said, "Now get your things and go see your dad." So I ran over, I visited with Cheryl. Little did I know, Cheryl's dad also died of pancreatic cancer. And me and Cheryl she was like my grandmother on campus. She was the reason I graduated college, bar none. I didn't know that at the time, but I shared with her and I said, I've got to go. I've got to go to Iowa City and I've got to go be with Dad and figure out what we're going to do. And everything changed. I pulled over, I don't know how many times, because I couldn't see through tears of like, our world was crashing down right now. And I didn't even know stage 4 was the worst it could be. It could have been the best for all I knew. But the more and more you start digging into it is like in 2011, stage 4 pancreatic cancer had like a less than 5% survival rate within 5 months. And the doctor had given him a few weeks and months and whatever. And we got five rounds of chemo, 4 radiation treatments, and we got 10 months with the man. And he pushed through until the very end. And that taught me how to be resilient. And he worked. Case was so gracious. They gave him a laptop, and I doubt he got a whole lot of work done at home because he was so sick, but they gave him a laptop, and that was how they could justify paying him and continuing to pay him. And Mom's on disability, so there's not a lot of income. Dad is it. I spent a lot of my student loan money to make sure they were all right, and they had gas money to get back and forth to Iowa City. And we kind of stopped everything in life. It was like everything still moved around us, but for our little world, it was closing in. And for 10 months, we got to spend so many moments that mattered together. And it was, I tell people, and a lot of people look at you funny, but I say, I thank God that Dad had cancer, because had he died in a car wreck, I don't know what my viewpoint would have been or how crushed I would have been, or if I'd even been able to function afterward. But for 10 months, we knew the end date was coming. We knew after the Whipple surgery failed on New Year's Eve, we knew there was no way that this cancer would ever be eradicated from his pancreas, that it was impossible. God was going to take him on one day, and we just didn't know when. So every moment had to matter. And we spent those last 10 months just asking the questions. What did you do here? What was high school like? I knew Dad had an afro. I didn't know about what kind of car he drove or anything like that, or what his childhood was like. He lived next door to his grandmother over by DuPont, and what that was like, what great-grandpa Vince was like that I never got to meet. And all those things that we're too busy to ask those questions in everyday life. But when you know there's an end date coming, you want to get all that context of what life is. So Brooke and I got done with school that year in the spring, went home, and we stayed up literally every night until the sun got up. And we just asked Dad questions. And we were able to, by that time, I had accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, but I didn't know if Dad had. And it's a sticky subject because in my house, Mom was raised very apostolic Christian, and Dad was raised very Roman Catholic. Those two religions do not get along very well. They butt heads about a lot of things. There's a lot of differences in beliefs and belief factors. So religion was never a discussion in our home, and God and that sort of thing. If anything was really talked about faith or God, it was that the road to hell was paved with lies was like what we heard all the time, but it wasn't. Jesus loves you, and he died on this cross, and he had all these disciples, and the true story. We had the fear side of it, and Dad never really opened up until he was sick, and I got to see him work with a pastor from Wapello, and that gentleman poured into Mom and Dad, and just made sure he had a good life, but loved on him the way that we should love on our neighbors, and got to have those conversations about the letters in red in the gospel and what they mean, and got to see Dad really grow close to the Lord in those last few months that give me the passion, give me the confidence that one day I'll see him again in heaven. And had he just died in a car wreck, I don't know if I would feel as confident in that. So I thank God that he gave Dad cancer, and he gave Dad 10 months that we could experience with him going through that changed everything about life and how I go about my life, how Brooke goes about hers, and Juffin and Mom and my older siblings and everybody look at life differently now because of that. And we lost Dad in July of 2012. I think he was 46 years old. But my dad would be the first person to tell you he had no friends. Dad always was very negative towards what other people perceived him as. He always felt like he was never enough, or he didn't have friends, and he didn't have these relationships. And I'll never forget the people that stood outside of his visitation and his funeral around Barr Memorial Chapel and stood around. We had his boat parked in the grass, and the people that stood outside during his services because he made a difference. And he never got to experience that, never got to see that. So I'm intentional now. When somebody makes a difference in my life, I tell them. Using the words, I'm proud of you and I love you, are two things that I say every day because they're so meaningful. And it was, to step back, it was that day when I hugged Dad at the University of Iowa hospitals. And he was crying, I was crying, and he said, we're going to beat this, and I love you. That was the first time I remember my dad ever saying, I love you, in my entire life. And I was 18 years old. That was impactful. My daughter will never, ever have to wonder if I love her. He told me, I'm proud of you on high school graduation. And when we went to went to Iowa State, and we were leaving there, they made him like write letters to send to you so you don't get homesick. And he said, call your mom. We love you. And I still have that postcard. And it's like, that's the most powerful thing you can tell people, are those 3 words. Why don't we say them more? So now, and I use it in business. If there's any little win, we're going to celebrate it. And I'm going to make sure my team knows you're a rock star. You're amazing. I'm so glad that you woke up today and chose to come to work, and that you chose to make the difference that you make today, because we're making a difference in this world for farmers and for the people on MLK Boulevard in Des Moines and the water that they're drinking. But I'm proud of you for doing so. And that was a big turning point in my life, with Dad getting diagnosed and going through his battle, and the reactions that I had, or actions I had back and forth with him, to get me to who I am as a 31-year-old father today that wants to build this dynasty. I'm Jeff Lucas Jr. I have a lot of boots to fill, and I don't take that lightly. I want to make him proud, and I want to live on our legacy for our last name, so that people one day might go back a couple generations and find out just how special my dad was to the world.
And I love you sharing the story with me, because it's I knew him as the scout leader,
Yeah.
and obviously when he passed away, those are the 2 milestones that I stick out from when I knew him. Because what is your given name?
Jeffrey Thomas Lucas Jr.
When did you stop going by Jeffrey and go as Jeff?
I'm guessing midway through elementary school.
Okay.
I don't really remember what defined that or what that reasoning was. Pete Mankey called me Catfish. So really, I would go by anything. As long as you said it in a nice tone, I was willing to come be your friend.
Sure. Well, and I know it's interesting, like the legacy stuff, because you probably hadn't thought about any of that when you're like you said, you're 3 weeks into college. You're like, where's the dorms at? Where's
Yeah.
the fun stuff happening? Like, where are my classes? How did those 10 months with your dad and with your family restructure kind of those interpersonal relationships? Because like you said, you weren't on super good terms with your dad at the time. You're kind of rocky with some of your siblings and your mom. How did those relationships change with this huge event that shaped everything?
So it brought us together and pulled us apart at the same time. I think Jeff and I think he would agree with this, really went off the deep end. You guys were juniors in high school when Dad was diagnosed, and he had to watch Dad get chemo sick and had to help Dad stand up from the toilet as a junior in high school. And those things are things that I think Jeff would love to forget, but I wish you'd look inside of what he felt as he was the man of the house. I was gone. He had to make sure Mom was taken care of, and Jeff went off the deep end and made some poor choices and ran with the wrong crowd and folks that I don't necessarily agree with, and made choices in school that probably weren't the best for him. But that's how he coped. That was his grieving process, and his grieving started long before the funeral, because he saw Dad go from a 250-pound man to 98 pounds in the course of 6 months. And when we were pulling fluid off Dad's abdomen and all those different things, Juffin tried to get out. He needed to get away, escape, and I don't blame him for that. And I think it really pushed us apart, and it wasn't until we got married in 2016 and he flew to Idaho with my big brother that we really kind of rebonded. And so between 2011 and 2016, we didn't talk a whole lot. And he flew out to the wedding, and I got to see what he was like raising his daughter. It's a stepdaughter, but to him, it's his daughter. And I got to see this whole new version of who Juffin was. And it made me so proud, because that's who Dad would want him to be. And we got to show him the mountains and show him all over Boise and the Treasure Valley and kind of where we were living. And I was living, he had the same dream as me in Rodeo and wanted to dive off into this world. At that time, we were living on 80 acres, and we had racehorses and longhorns everywhere, and we were living the dream. And it wasn't ours, it was my in-laws, but we were living it. We were no longer strapped to a 800 square foot house on Richards Drive. The world was at our fingertips. And I really got to see that change in him. And I'm sure it happened long before then, but that was when I finally got to experience it and really got to rebuild that relationship with him to where he's my best friend. We video FaceTime or whatever each other all the time. And it's great to talk to his kids, but I really want to know what's going on in his world. What's going on at the ammunition plant, and what's going on in the acreage that he has north of Fort Madison out by Denmark now, and the little things that he's winning on in life that he's not being told in his brain, hey, these are little wins, because it's not the way he thinks. He thinks differently, which is fine. But I want to see those wins and be able to celebrate them with him. So Dad's journey and death really kind of threw everything out and shattered the house. And then we picked up the pieces and we built it back the way we thought would be best.
Sure. Well, it's super interesting, because I've had the Steffensmeyer siblings on. Like, I've had Rachel and Isaac, because Isaac's in my grade.
Yeah.
And
those guys are killing it.
Oh yeah, doing great stuff. And it's just interesting comparing your story, because both very different experiences, but similar, where you lose your father in high school, but Isaac had just, in your case, he had just went to college, and in your case, you had just went to college, where the younger siblings had to live and, like you said, watch the health decline and just the issues that kind of present themselves. It's more of a slower burn, and it's more painful for, I feel like, for some of those folks, where
absolutely
it's just a different experience. So as you guys have kind of reconnected with some of those things, what are some of the things or traditions that you guys do to try to honor your father now that he's passed away?
So Jeff actually, he bought a piece of ground that's got a pond with it. So fishing is kind of a thing we do, is just fish in his little pond and give him crap and talk about who's caught more fish or bigger fish. And that was Dad's passion. Long before Scouts or our family was fishing. Dad's graduation gift in college was a boat that still sits at Jeffin's house. But We try to bond over those kinds of things. Obviously, Dad's mom, Grandma Mary's still around, so taking her out to Brad's Pad and all the little local joints and making sure we're pouring back in and getting those stories and memories that way as well. There's just so much that we grew up with in Southeast Iowa that we're so fortunate with, from Paul Miller Park to Camp Eastman across the river to Riverview Park and all the different things that we had access to as kids growing up, that we're trying to bring our kids up that same way and teach them a passion or instill a passion in them for fishing, teach them how to handle things and go through this life that is ever changing. But all those little qualities that Mom and Dad instilled in us growing up.
Sure. I love it. Shifting gears into kind of the college, you mentioned you kind of finished college with your education or elementary education degree. As we're kind of coming into post-grad, your whole life like you said, you got picked up, dropped on your head, and you had to get up and dust yourself off. How did that affect your career path and what you did post-graduation?
So it was big. Obviously, having my wife as my rock got me through all of that. But I hit depression really, really bad. And it was a dark time for me, and I didn't really even acknowledge it was a dark time. I had given up in a lot of cases, and it was, if it wasn't for Cheryl Lindholm and different people at the university pouring into me, I'd have never graduated college. I'd have never gotten to my sophomore year of college. I wanted to go make a difference and really rescue my brother, is what was at the top of my mind. But I knew if I'd done that, I would hinder myself and my future in a great way, that I had to stay the course. I had to graduate school. Elementary education was what I wanted to do because I wanted to make a difference for the youth. And through high school, working at Schools Out, which was an after-school program, was amazing for experience. And I got to see what it was like to actually pour into these kids as a high school kid. Always did the Big Brothers Big Sisters programs and whatever I could to try to make a difference. And I think that goes to the servant mindset that we were taught as kids, that Mom and Dad did through Scouts. It was all about serving other people and taking care of them. So going through school, being taught, it was around the same time as like Common Core was a big new thing, and I'm not the greatest studious person in the world. I didn't learn how to really read until probably fourth grade, and that was when Mr. Mendez sat me down and pretty much drilled it into my head that if you're going to be somebody in this world, and if you want to be different than everybody else, you need to work different. You need to work harder. You were born in a way that you're going to have to work harder than the person sitting next to you. And I'll never forget those after-school conversations with him that made me want to be a better person, made me want to work harder and do better. And he's the reason I wanted to teach. I wanted to be Mr. Mendez for hundreds of other kids. Through student teaching, I got to see the nasty side of education.
Where did you student teach? Public school or private school?
Public school. Yeah. So I was in Baxter for one session and then Ogden for another. And both had their strengths and cons. But the biggest thing I had an issue with was I had a student, and at that time, I don't know if it's still the way in the state of Iowa, but there were standardized tests for reading comprehension. And in second grade, if your student failed 2 out of the 3 tests, they were automatically held back. And I had an issue with that because one of my students was involved in a house raid where Mom and Dad were arrested on Monday night. And she had to spend the night with Grandma and Grandpa in Adele. She got brought to school in Ogden. They said she still has to take the test. Well, she'd failed the first time. She's going to fail the second time. She just her world is upside down. Mom and Dad are in jail. It's not pretty. And this girl struggled anyways, but they set her up to fail. And I raised every red flag. I threw a fit to the principal, the superintendent, the university, the state house, anybody I could get an ear on. I threw a fit because no matter how much I cared for that student, I couldn't do the best thing for that student. And that drove me nuts. And I said, I can't tie my hands behind my back and stay working in a school system if people outside of the school are making decisions on what this kid's life's going to be like 5, 6, 10 years from now because she was held back or unrightfully taken tests when she should have been loved on and poured into by the guidance counselor and kind of paved a path for her to grieve and understand what was going on at home. And nobody there wanted to listen. And I said, I'm done. I got my degree, and I said, I'll never teach. And I turned down job opportunities in Ankeny, Ames. We knew we were going to move to Idaho because my in-laws had bought the ranch out there. Turned down a couple jobs out there, and I just said, there's no way. No way would I bind myself. And God bless all the teachers that get up every morning and pour their heart and soul into their students and truly wear their students' emotions on their sleeve every day when they get home. And it's not the homework and checking papers and grading papers I've found is the smallest part of the extra work that teachers do. It's the true emotional battle that those teachers go through and thinking about the students that don't have food tonight. And this teacher may make $40,000 a year and has a family of 3, feeds all their kids, and then takes extra food for that student to secretly have food on the weekends. Then nobody talks about that or recognizes those people because they don't want recognition. They just want to make a difference. And I felt like I could make a bigger difference in the world outside of the classroom. So going into business, that was a passion of mine, was marketing and business, growing businesses. I had some great mentors. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. LinkedIn is the greatest resource in the world in today's era. I met a gentleman on there who was the president and CEO of Miller International, which is the parent company of Cinch Jeans. And at the time, he had just taken a job where he was the president and CEO of American Hat Company. And on his LinkedIn, it said elementary education was his degree. And I thought, there's no way. How does a guy this successful go through school for elementary education? So I shot him a message, and I shot my shot. I wanted a chance to talk to this gentleman. And he replied back, and we set up a phone call my sophomore year of college. And I remember sitting in the guest room at our apartment and clinging to every word this man said because he had done exactly what I wanted to do. He had gone through education, student teaching. He realized this is not the right fit. He was in inner city LA and just bad demographics that he was having to deal with coming from ag background in the hills of California. And he said, I'm not doing this. And he went and built some construction companies and built different businesses and ended up becoming what's now one of the largest hat companies in the world. And he gets to run that every day. I'm like, God, this guy's my hero. And he's become a great mentor of mine, Keith Mundy. And I look at life now. Yes, I have the degree, but the degree, all it did was propel me forward. If you can teach a third grader how important it is to read and not pick your nose in public, you can sell anything to anybody. And that's all our teachers are doing. They're salespeople. They're the most amazing salespeople with passion and integrity, and they want the best for their customer, and their customer could be a classroom of third graders. So Keith kind of instilled that in me, and that kind of bled into the business world of treat people the way you'd want them to treat your kids and teach your kids and set them up for success, and you'll always win. And that's where that's where it's gotten me to today. So I've never taught in the classroom and collected a W-9 paycheck or W-2 paycheck because of teaching, but I've gotten enough experience doing it, working at daycares and all sorts of things, that it just wasn't the right place where I could make the biggest difference for me. Some people, they can make a tremendous difference and do an amazing job, sacrificing so much to teach our kids every day, but that just wasn't the route I wanted to pursue. So I went the business route, and now we get to give back in a variety of different ways, and hopefully, like I said, become a philanthropist where we can make a big difference one day.
This episode is sponsored by Jacobson & Company, LLP, a CPA firm based in the Des Moines metro area. We actually had Grant, one of their partners, on the podcast as a guest, and they were gracious enough to sponsor today's show. Grant and his team are my personal accountants that help both my wife and I with our accounting, tax prep, and business planning for both of our businesses and for our family. And we brag on them often and have sent a ton of people their way over the years, which makes this ad really easy to endorse since I've had them on retainer for a couple of years now. Their team is always keeping me up to date on the latest litigation changes, tax law changes, and other things that I have no time and, frankly, no interest in keeping up with all by myself. The year before I started working with Grant, I think my tax bill was over $30,000, and I had like 2 months to come up with that money. I was not sleeping. I was working myself ragged, trying to come up with the cash so the IRS didn't come after me. That's when I realized I needed a great CPA to keep me out of the hot water. After meeting with him and making some changes, I got a $10,000 refund the following year just by getting educated on how taxes work and leaning into their knowledge base. A good CPA is an invaluable resource for any small business out there. They offer everything from QuickBooks management all the way up to fractional CFO type services, depending on how big your business is. And their staff is really responsive and answer any and all stupid questions that I have every single month. Supporting the sponsors that support this show allows this podcast to continue to be free for you and that you can enjoy each and every week. If you're needing a new CPA for your personal tax prep, or you're growing a business and need a well-versed accountant in your corner, make sure to check them out at jacobsoncpa.net and tell them that you came from the Rhymes with Odd podcast. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Like you said, the teachers, the coaches, the counselors, the scout leaders, these people that pour in really do make an impact, because you look back at your childhood and you're like, I could have went this way and I went this way instead, or this teacher, this coach or whoever pushed you the other direction, that can really, give you those character skills that you don't even realize you have until you're an adult, which is really cool.
Yeah. And you've had one of them in here, Mr. Butcher. He was that guy when it was dark in the gym and I was still shooting from the sidelines trying to make whatever 25 buckets in a row or whatever. And he was walking out leaving. He said, "Don't quit until you get it." And I'll never forget that. Do not quit until you get your goal. And Dad was outside in the parking lot. It was middle of winter, snowing and freezing cold. And Dad sat out there in his Tahoe until I got my 25 baskets or whatever it was. And then I felt good enough to leave. But it was like, hey, Butcher believes in me. I need to believe in myself. And those people are priceless to this world. What would this world be without teachers, coaches, scout leaders, volunteers that pour into the youth of our country? What would our world be like? I don't think it'd be near as good as it is today.
Sure. No, I totally agree. So you end up in Idaho. You have this connection with the American Hat Company, which I'm sure we'll weave in here. But what was your first job post-grad?
So I struggled right off the bat. I got in and had a mutual connection that was in the hat business and helped him build some wholesale accounts right off the bat. Brooke struggled to kind of find her foot. Going from Iowa agriculture to Idaho agriculture is vastly different.
It's a lot of potatoes there, right?
Potatoes, onions, sugar beets, a lot of one-off different produce. There's a lot of hops.
Here it's just like
a lot of corn, soybeans, and some wheat. But out there, they've got so much stuff, and they irrigate so much. Where here, we're blessed with rain. We don't have to water our crops here, thank God. And there you deal with water rights and all that kind of stuff. So she struggled a little bit. I struggled. Finally kind of got our rhythm, and then got married out there. We were there about a year and a half and got married on the ranch. And then we had kind of an issue. Her father he was an alcoholic, and it wasn't a good place for us. I had lived through that life in my younger childhood, and I said, I'm not going to do this again. And it got to the point where we got married, and we had a dry wedding because we didn't want him to do something dumb, and he ended up drinking anyways and did something dumb. And it was like, hey, this is the last straw. We're done. And we loaded up a U-Haul 2 weeks later, and we drove back to Iowa to reset and gave up everything. We'd have inherited that property. We'd have had everything at our fingertips, but it wasn't worth it. What's the price of your happiness? And leaving that driveway, the hardest thing was Brooke's old gelding horse, her first love. We had to leave in Idaho, and that was the last time she got to see him. And that was so difficult. But when we left that driveway, it was like this elephant was off our backs. We didn't have to maintain the same lifestyle that my father-in-law is a retired Air Force pilot and a FedEx pilot, and his income, and my mother-in-law who worked at the VA and running the blood lab. We didn't have to uphold what they were keeping afloat financially. We could just start from scratch. All we had was student loans, which were quite a bit and daunting. We had student loans and they even have a car note. So we kind of set goals in life and said, we're going to work from the ground up and build our foundation the way we want it. And we waited to have children until student loans were paid off. And that was a big discipline thing. We'd love to have children in our mid-20s, but financially we weren't able to do that when we had $1,000 a month going to student loans. And We made the right choices at the right times to get us where we are today. But Idaho, I look at it looking back now and say, thank God we were there for the year and a half, because that's when my rodeo career really spiked. I was fortunate enough to get in front of the right people at the right time and have a good showing to where the word of mouth spread like wildfire. I still go and work about 5 different events in the state of Idaho every year. Because I built those relationships and did a good job and kind of changed the way rodeo was presented in that area from the level I was at, and was fortunate enough to build what is my career out in the Treasure Valley, and love those people. Love going back. I love getting to see the mountains. I love not having to live out in the foothills anymore and be way out from nowhere and not being able to being a flatlander. Driving through the mountains to get to work for a rodeo really drove me nuts. I could drive the brand new pickup right off the lot, but I was always worried that climbing the mountain something was going to blow up or whatever. I was always fearful. So being back this way where everything's flat and you're not so worried about climbing a 3% grade and going up over the big mountains, it's a lot more relaxing. But Idaho was such a gift to us and showed us what we wanted. And we had to give up something to leave there, but it was so worth it and got us to where we're at now.
Sure. Well, and you've had to make, and you and Brooke as well have had to make these really hard, I don't want to call them selfish decisions, but necessary decisions for your own happiness.
Yeah.
What are those feelings like for both of you to share that experience? I mean, she had to see you go through some of this just on your own and be somebody to lean on, but what was it like to make that decision as a married couple in your first 2 weeks of marriage? They talk about the good and the bad, all that stuff. What was that like to make that decision together?
I think, and I wasn't going to be the one to bring it up. Me and her dad had some issues, and I wasn't going to be the one that said, hey, we're going to leave your family. Her entire family was there. Her older brother and older sister also lived on the ranch, and I wasn't going to be the one that said, hey, we're leaving, because that could cause huge issues, and it's not my place to take her away from that. We were turning in the marriage license the Tuesday after we got married, and the father-in-law called and started raising Cain, and she looked at me and she said, let's go home. And home was Iowa. And I said, are you sure? She said, yeah, we're done. And I had a rodeo to work, a finals that next weekend. And then my best friend in Idaho passed away after the first night at that finals. So his funeral was the next week, and the family asked me to kind of officiate and help with the funeral. So we stayed for 2 weeks longer than we would have. But we got the U-Haul, we loaded it, and we said goodbye to what our future. We'd drawn out house plans. She'd drawn up fence for 5-6 years. That was the only thing we knew was we're going to live on this ranch in Caldwell, Idaho. And in one phone call, it was gone. And it was like, all right, we're going to pivot. So as newlyweds, we slept on my little brother's futon for 3 weeks. And
romantic.
In his small house and his wife and daughter. And we just got by. And we found, but it was, God started dropping little things of like, hey, I've got your back. So the first kind of like God wink was we got back to Fort Madison, sleeping on his futon, and we find an ad. We wanted to be back in central Iowa. Ames, to me, is one of the greatest communities in the world. Just young, college-educated, goal-minded people, and most of them come from an ag background, so they're one of us. But we had this ad on Craigslist for a house in Ames, and it was in the country, and it was like $500, 2-bedroom, basement, and a 2-car garage. And I'm thinking, this has got to be the biggest scam in the world. But I call it because you never know.
Yeah.
So I call it. And
are you missing a zero at the end?
Yeah. So I talked to this gal on the phone and I told her we're in Fort Madison. Turns out she used to date Rob Faith, or one of the Faith boys.
No way.
And I said, well, by God, that was one of my Boy Scout leaders.
Yeah.
And we kind of hit it off, found out it wasn't a scam. This is just a gal. She works at the university and she has this guest house on her farm that she just has students kind of filter through when they need a place to live, and doesn't charge an outrageous amount of money. She charges what she needs for it and provided a great home for us for a year. And it was like, okay, God, we're listening now. This is your plan, whatever you want us to do. And then we threw a wrench into that and decided we were going to move to Tennessee without knowing anybody. And we'd driven through for a weekend, and we loved Middle Tennessee. It was beautiful. It was Memorial Day weekend, so everything's lush green and there's blue skies. It was a perfect realtor's picture of, hey, come move here. And we drove through. We thought Auburn was probably where we'd end up because it's another college town. Didn't really care for that. Tallahassee wasn't really our style. Thomaston, Georgia wasn't our style. So we drove back through Middle Tennessee, and we're like, yep, this is it. We're here. Turns out we drove through like Leapers Fork, Franklin, Brentwood, where all the celebrities live.
Yeah,
and
the nice area of Nashville.
Absolute amazing properties and rolling hills and cows everywhere. And
I was just there in October last year, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Just
and
some really nice, like old, like I wouldn't call them like plantation houses, but kind of similar
for
like
sure.
that. Just the willow trees.
Yeah.
And I'm like, gosh, this is like old money. This is really nice. So.
And we drove through there, and that was what we imagined. We're like, oh my gosh, we could live here. Absolutely. Little did we know we could never afford to live in that area. But about 6 months later, Brooke quit her job. She worked for the university farms, and I was running marketing for a drug rehab in Ames, and gave our 30 days. And she moved down with her best friend's sister, who lived just south of Nashville. She'd never met her before. Moved in with her and her kids, and kind of scoped out, found us an apartment north of Nashville in a town called Hendersonville. It's where Johnny Cash and Conway Twitty, and it's kind of the old fancy, I guess, rich area of Nashville.
Sure.
Up on the lake, and we had that little apartment. We paid twice as much money for a one-bedroom apartment on the second level with no elevator in the middle of town, and compared to the house we had in Ames. And we started thinking, whoa, did we just make the right choice? And we had nothing taking us to Nashville. We just decided we wanted to change up, and I didn't really want to live through another winter in Iowa. So Rodeo was moving east of the Mississippi, was the commissioner of the PRCA at that time. His passion was to bring Rodeo east of the Mississippi. So I said, I'll beat you there. I'll be there waiting for you, and y'all just come on, and we'll be here. And that never ended up happening. So over 7 years, Brooke took a job with the USDA at the state office in downtown Nashville. So she was 2 blocks from like Tootsie's and all the bars and a federal courthouse. So we didn't go downtown a whole lot because she had to drive through that traffic every day to get to work. It was not a fun thing to go drive downtown and experience the honky tonks.
All the tourists everywhere and the bachelorette parties.
So we stayed pretty home base in Hendersonville, and then lived for a few months in West Tennessee. She took a job in the field with NRCS. That was not a good place for us, so we got back to Middle Tennessee and ended up in a town called Lebanon. It's spelled like Lebanon, but all the locals call it Lebanon. It's just east of Nashville on I-40. So lived there. Found that townhouse we found through Facebook Marketplace. We're at Bojangles looking for somewhere to live and rent, and we couldn't find anything, and found this one townhouse. Looked like a scam on Facebook Marketplace, and we lived there for, 6 years or so. So kind of lived all over the place. We moved my mother-in-law to Tennessee, I think it was 2021. We built her a house in a subdivision, and she lived there, and it was good. We kind of set some roots there for a little bit, but we knew they were just temporary, and thought we'd end up moving to Texas or something like that afterwards. And then I had a health scare, kind of a false diagnosis, so to say, that caused us to move back here where I was home. And as much as I hate the winters, and I'm really regretting coming up here, and it's going to snow and it's cold and all that, the people, the scenery, everything about Iowa is just home. You can drive down the gravel roads, and you're always 1 mile and one right-hand turn away from being on the other grid and finding a paved road to get you back to the highway. Mm-hmm. Now where we've lived, it hasn't been like that. There's so many unknowns and so many big cities and a bunch of people and just too much going on. So moving back here is kind of a slower life for us. And I kind of found my home with IAWA and getting work in the agriculture world. She works at the state office downtown for NRCS, but I kind of get bounce things off her and say, what is this? And how does this make any sense? And she works in that world, has worked in there for the last decade. So I've got a built-in resource and Brooke to be able to bounce ideas off of. But that's good. The people are all great here. And
Sure.
it's amazing what coming home and God saying, yeah, now you're where you're supposed to be. I'm not going to throw any more wrenches into your plans.
Sure. Well, and I know we talked about, I mean, you had this huge rodeo career we haven't really dug super deep into. Yeah. Give me kind of a scope of like what that looked like. I mean, you mentioned you were doing announcing.
Yeah.
So you're using the choir voice just for a different purpose.
Exactly.
What did that look like in terms of the different rodeos you were announcing and kind of getting plugged into that world?
Yes, I was fortunate enough. I've worked rodeos from Oregon to Buffalo, New York, Mobile, Alabama to Minnesota. So I've covered coast to coast and border to border, and been fortunate enough. That was a sole income for a while. I got kind of on during COVID and everything was crazy. Obviously, rodeo is not a must-have thing in the world, so we weren't very essential, and most of that income dried up very fast. So took a job. I was working for a company that were brokering FedEx routes. So FedEx routes, for those of you that don't know, is the guy that delivers your package doesn't work for FedEx corporate. He works for a small business owner. And those routes, those contracts are worth millions of dollars. And I worked for the guy that was the largest FedEx contractor in the world. And he had built an educational platform to help new investors come into the space. So I got in at the very bottom when it's just starting to ramp up, and worked there through biz dev and then on into senior consultant. I worked with folks, they paid, I think it was $10,000 or something to have me help them do due diligence on different businesses, decide which one was best for them. And then I took over as national sales manager for a first of its kind truck leasing program for delivery trucks. So got to see kind of the big picture of big corporate world that way. When I got there, I think I was employee 19. And when I left, I think we were up to like 150 maybe, doing $250 million worth of business. So it was cool. It gave me that experience. It was in Brentwood. We were I would park next to the CEO of Kirkland's at our office.
Oh, sure.
Like it was a whole different world. Opened my eyes to so much more than, hey, you can be successful outside of the world of wearing a cowboy hat to work every day, and gave me that confidence to where I could go on and do whatever. Of course, I love being able to be me and pour back into the ag and Western way of life. But seeing my success there gave me the wherewithal to push forward and say the world is full of opportunities. I just got to pick which ones are best for me.
Sure. Well, and it sounds like it just in the world of rodeo, you'd get a random phone call or a planning person calls you and says, hey, we got a rodeo coming to Tennessee area. Can you announce for us? It's not just like you're on the road, like a traveling circus for a terrible comparison, but you're not like with the same crew, you box it up, go to the next town. It sounds like more contractual, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm an independent contractor that I work for in some places like here in Iowa. I work mainly for a rodeo production company that we do a handful, and it is kind of like a traveling circus. We take the same crew everywhere, and it could be 3 nights in a row in 3 different corners of the state that we're doing rodeos. Out west and down south, I work more for committees. So the folks, you think Kiwanis Club, Rotary Club, firefighters, groups, things that they're trying to raise money for their community. It's their fundraiser for the year. So I work for them, and it could be 3 people, it could be 50 people on that committee. Mm-hmm. And I usually have 1 or 2 that are kind of my contacts. But if I don't do a good job or I do a good job and I want to come back, I've got to answer to all 50 of them to get that job back. So I'm fortunate enough, most places I go, I've gone for, close to 10 years now. I've kind of built myself. I know where to go and know what dry cleaners to go to and what coffee shops are the best, and have gotten to see folks that are on those committees kind of go through and retirement, and now we're getting to see their grandkids and they're starting to volunteer, and it's kind of a big cycle. But yeah, there's no – it's not like a basketball team where you know where you're going every week and that's set out and planned for you, and agents handle all the travel. We do everything ourselves. Mm-hmm. But it pays good. It's a good living for our family, and it's able to to share our Western way of life with people that otherwise wouldn't get to see that side of the world. I've done everything from we bucked bulls inside of a church sanctuary in downtown Atlanta, Georgia, and it was a men's conference, and they baptized 99 men that night. It was amazing. But we had to bring bulls literally through the hallways of this church to get them into where the stage is. And Crowder, it's Passion City Church. Crowder, the music group, they record in that church. They're home based out of there, their studios. So you think all the technology, the floors are probably millions of dollars. And we ran bulls on carpet pads through their hallways to get them to the sanctuary. I worked my 4th of July rodeos up in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I've met Tom Hanks there and Ashton Kutcher. There's so many big wigs that's their spot to go to in the mountains. So they'll fly in, and the airport's full of Lear jets, and they'll come to the rodeo. And for a lot of those folks, it's the only time they will see a horse or a cow up close and personal. Mm-hmm. So for them, it's kind of a life-changing event that hopefully one of them or two of them want to become cowboys or get involved in agriculture and maybe use some of their wealth to buy a ranch and raise cattle in Montana or wherever that is. The Yellowstone craze has certainly helped us for that. But like that rodeo, I look at that rodeo way differently than I look at Cornersville, Tennessee, because the demographic of customers that are there is totally different.
Sure.
And Cornersville, everybody there owns a cow and a horse. Haley, Idaho, most of those people, they couldn't tell you what the hoof of a cow looks like. So it's a total difference based on where you're at geographically, and then we have to change our style to fit where we are and what our audience kind of dictates from us.
Well, and I wanted to get your opinion on this too. In terms of, I call them like the fake cowboys, like the posers, whatever you want to call it. Like you put on a mask and now you're this person. What's your opinion about those types of people that either attend the rodeos or that are just out in the world? Because I feel like a lot of people have one opinion one way or the other. What's your stance on it?
I used to be really negative on it. And to be honest, I thought those people were bringing our industry down. Now that I see it from working with endorsement deals that I have with Wrangler or American Hat Company, those are the people that buy the clothes. Those are the people that buy the boots. They buy the hats. And if their hat's on backwards, I'll kindly tell them, hey, your hat's on backwards. The bow goes in the back. And not call them out and make fun of them, but like, hey, that's the guy that bought the ticket. I've never had somebody that I saw as a poser for a rodeo call me asking for free tickets to a rodeo. I've got plenty of cowboy friends that call me everywhere we go asking for a pass. So those are the people investing in our culture. And Yellowstone has done amazing for that. It's built our industry and everything from the retail side tenfold because everybody now wants to be a cowboy. And that's amazing. What greater compliment than to have so many people want to live the life that we're blessed to live.
Sure. No, I totally agree with that. And I think it's interesting seeing that because I remember my first rodeo I went to was in high school, and I didn't know I was going until we went to the Tri-State Rodeo, and I was like, oh, crap, I'm not dressed for that. Like a white shirt on, like plaid shorts and like tennis shoes. And God, everybody was looking at me like I was a leper, you know. I was not dressed for the occasion. But also I'm like, I felt bad because I'm like, well, I don't like if I go buy a bunch of clothes that I'm going to wear one day a year. It's like, am I being myself? It's one of those things like you don't want to like be a poser, like you said, because I wasn't that guy either. So it's like just trying to figure out. I'm just curious what your
and those folks, like if I go to a basketball game, I'm not gonna wear a basketball jersey. That's just not me. Sure. And I have no problem if you show up in board shorts and flip flops. I'm just thankful you bought a ticket, and hopefully you have fun and you're entertained.
Sure.
And I think in our way of life, we cater too much to the people that wear the hats and wear them the right direction instead of the people that come here just because they love the entertainment. You weren't coming to rodeo just to the nines because you were trying to fit in. You were there just to enjoy the entertainment. Sure. And that's who we really need to cater our product to, because those are the people that are coming from the cities to learn a little bit more about our Western way of life.
Sure. No, I love it. We're going to take a break for the lightning round. Now that we're talking about rodeo stuff, this is the lightning round trivia of all things rodeo. Some of these things might be easy. They might be hard. I don't know.
I hope you don't stump me.
Well, we might have mixed a couple in here. We'll see here. We'll start with a kind of an easier one, or at least I think it's an easier one. For calf roping, how many legs does a calf roper have to tie together?
Oh, that's a good one. So 3. is what the correct answer is. They can have the fourth leg tied up in the big loop, and it still counts. You just have to have 3 legs tied together with the short rope. We call it a pig and string.
Okay, perfect. I was going to say 2 is too little, and then if you tie one leg, you're not tied to anything.
Yeah.
Just tie a rope around someone's leg. That's perfect. That is correct. Okay, next one. What is the penalty for knocking down a barrel in barrel racing?
So it's 5 seconds per barrel. Can be a total of 15 total. And there's a lot of old rodeo adage, if you knock all 3 barrels, you win a pizza. So I've never seen anybody actually get the pizza. I've seen a lot of people upset for hitting all 3 barrels, though.
Sure. That is also correct. There you go. There's your gimmies.
Yeah.
Because as an announcer, you got to know
all
the stuff. All right. It's like announcing a sports event or something. You got to know the rules. So kind of going more on the history side, which bull is regarded as the rankest of all time?
Well, it depends who you ask. I would say most people probably say Bodacious because of what he did to Tuff Edelman's face and Clint Branger's face. And he was outlawed. The PRCA said that he was no longer allowed to buck in a PRCA rodeo because he was so dangerous. Other people, if they've watched 8 seconds, they would say Red Rock because of the battle between Lane Frost and Red Rock and John Growney and what they did to really build up who Lane and Red Rock were on the West Coast doing a bunch of different challenges. To me, Bushwhacker are one of those newer bulls that within the last 10 years or so, the breeding programs are just exploded. So I would say Bushwhacker for me personally. Most people would say Bodacious or Red Rock.
Sure. Yeah, Bodacious was the one I was looking for, but yeah, the full length there. And you answered my follow-up question, which was which bull rider was the first person that he smashed their face in, and it was
Tuff Edelman.
Tuff Edelman. So, and I think that kind of explains too, like some people would compare this like alternative sports, alternative entertainment to different things, and you think of like I've watched a ton of sports documentaries like WWE and all this other stuff. It's like this is real, like this is real danger. It's not. Yes, it's entertainment, but it's real danger going on. Yeah. How can you speak to some of those things that people are skeptics when they come to a show?
Yeah, it's all there. There's no timeouts in rodeo. We're dealing with live animals that are bred to perform, and whether it be a fighting bull that's literally bred to kill anything in its path, or a bucking bull, they're bred more so to buck, but you have to build some aggression in them to really get the best potential out of them. Horses naturally don't want to hurt you, but there's 4 thundering hooves coming down, and if you're on the ground underneath of them, they've got to go somewhere, and they might step on your chest. I've lost a friend of mine growing up, Mason Lowe. He died in a bull riding accident in Denver a few years ago, and it was heartbreaking. Lane Frost dying in Cheyenne's a big one that everybody knows about. Brent Thurman at the National Finals Rodeo passed away. There was a cowboy just this summer, and I think it was South Carolina, that passed away of injuries. It's the real deal, and that's why I think so many people. My biggest issue with people who most would consider wannabes is they don't take the right steps to be in the right ability before they jump on and get on a bull, and it puts them at risk. It puts the bullfighters at risk and everybody else, because there is a way, even if you're getting bucked off, there's a way to you hold on just a little bit longer so you get thrown farther away from them instead of falling right underneath of them. And everybody worries about the horns. It's the hooves that will really hurt you. And even the timed events, you get caught up in a rope. Well, that's a poly rope that you've got, say, a calf on one end's 400 pounds and you've got a 1,200-pound horse on the other end, and you're stuck in between them with a rope wrapped around you. You can lose a leg really, really quickly. I think a lot of people from the entertainment side, they don't see it for as big a danger that it really is. The other side of that is most of our contestants travel. They'll get on in the bull ride, and they'll get on 100 bulls a year. So by the time we see them in Fort Madison, they're already hurt, and they might have a pulled groin or a broken leg or whatever it is. They've got serious issues going on, and they're still coming to perform, trying to qualify to the Wrangler National Finals in Las Vegas. So it's a real deal. MMA, those UFC deals where it's just all-out street fighting type stuff is really the only thing I can relate to what rodeo is, because it literally is a fight for 8 seconds in the rough stock, and in the timed events, hopefully it goes smoother. But there's a case that you could get punched in the nose repeatedly, and you have no way out. So it's very intense. It's very much real life danger, and I think that adds to the excitement factor for the fans at least.
In 1998 and 81, so 80 and 81, was it? Let's see, is it Don Gay won the back-to-back consecutive titles?
Yep.
Since then, who won the consecutive titles in 01 and 02?
Oh gosh, is it Bluestone?
Yep.
Golly, that's now listen. That's a tough question because
I didn't know.
You set it up. Donnie Gay is somebody everybody knows. He's 8-time. He's won it more than anybody else.
Sure.
Bluestone had a really big run there in the early 2000s, and God, I'm glad I got that right.
There you go.
I was worried there for a second.
Sure. No, that was good. Those are all my questions. You aced the list here. I thought I might stump you on one of those. So,
you almost did.
It's close.
Not gonna lie.
Okay, so we're doing all the rodeo stuff. You're traveling around. I mean, I think when I first talked to you, you're in Salt Lake City. You're out west. You're in Tennessee, traveling all over the place. At what point do you decide I think coming back to Iowa would be in the best interest for the family and trying to come back home again?
Yeah, so we were not this last summer, but the summer before. I'm really bad about going to the doctor, and I went to the doctor and got a checkup. And the doctor there in Tennessee did some blood labs and went for the reading out of the blood labs, and he's asking me all these questions. And he's like, "Well, so your dad had pancreatic cancer, grandpa had different kinds of cancer. Does anybody have blood cancer or leukemia?" And I was like, "No, not that I know of." And he said, "Well, your labs tell us that you have leukemia by the textbook. You are the guy that we would use as an example." And it was Thursday at 3:00 when he told me this. And I said, "Okay, so now what?" So we're going to take the labs again just to be certain. And then we'll talk about next steps if the next set of labs come back conclusive. So I went home. We were planning to leave 7:00 that night to drive up here to Iowa. We had Emmy Lou with us. She was still under 1 year old. Had the dog, loaded the truck. We were coming up to Iowa for a handful of rodeos, and I had Brooke with me. And I drove most of the way. We changed hands probably around, I don't know, Donaldson, Argyle, somewhere in there. And I said, I just can't drive anymore. So she's driving. I'm in the passenger seat, and we're coming through Pella, and the sun's rising, and she's crying. And I said, "What is wrong?" And she said, "I just want to be home. I want to be home." And I said, "Okay," and that's it. We'll move back to Iowa. At that moment, we didn't know if I had leukemia or some sort of cancer or what the deal was, but we knew life was possibly going to change in a big way. And to me, it was the thought, we were dead set going to Texas, and we were dead set that was our future. That's where we were going to be, in my eyes at least. And that moment just changed everything because I didn't want to move her and Emmy and her mom to Texas and then have to bury me in Iowa and then move back to Iowa where they wanted to live. So I said, all right, we're going to move back to Iowa. So it was a year, almost to the day, that I accepted the job at IAWA, and that was the biggest turning point. Was we had to have a reason to come up here. We were both working in Tennessee. I was working remote, running a trailer manufacturing company. So there really wasn't a draw to come to Iowa. For me to get over the hill and get that push, I had to take a job in Iowa, and was blessed that IAWA kind of fell open. And it was like, hey, the opportunity's here. See what comes of it. And through a lot of prayer and guidance through God, it was like, okay, you need to go to Iowa. So we moved up here early July. I had 5 days off in the entire month of July if I wasn't traveling or rodeoing. We moved up here, started the job on Monday. I left Monday afternoon, and I worked a rodeo in eastern Iowa that night. And IWA and my bosses, they were fantastic of allowing me to fulfill my obligations and be able to still rodeo. And they kind of see things as they want entrepreneurs in their office. They want somebody that looks at things like they own it. Even though I don't own the nonprofit, I look at it as this is my company and I'm going to make it succeed. And that's how they view everybody there. So they were very gracious in letting me continue to run my other business through the rodeo side of things, but got us back to Iowa. And I'll never forget the feeling. We stayed in Hannibal, or not Hannibal, we stayed north of Hannibal in Palmyra when we were driving up here. Stayed at our Airbnb, and we watched the sunset that night coming up 61. It was like, all right, we didn't see sunsets in Tennessee. There's too many trees and hills where we were at. We couldn't see the sunrise or sunset. And I always said that's where I wanted to be, was where I could see the sunrise and the sunset and know. To me, there's like a closure of the day of like, okay, this day is over when the sun sets. And we just didn't have that there. So it felt like we were running wide open all the time. And we watched that sunset in Palmyra, and it was like, okay, we're back on God's path of where he wanted us to be. We should have never left Iowa. So grateful for the experiences and opportunities we had. But it was like, okay, God, now you lead us. Where do you want us to be? And thankfully, Ankeny's where we're at now, and good daycare for the baby. And Brooke's mom's moved up here. She was 2 blocks from us in Ankeny, and get to see her every day. And it's such a blessing to be back home. And the feeling of we went and met a friend in Bondurant to pick up her daughter's shoes yesterday. But it's like, I know where that's at. I didn't even have to turn GPS on. And it's like, I didn't have that in Tennessee or Idaho, because it could be bad traffic and you got to find an alternative route. Here, I just know if I go on this highway and I jump on this road, we'll get where we need to go.
Sure.
So it's good to be home for sure.
Well, and did you finally figure out the diagnosis or situation with your health?
Oh, yeah.
Was it
false diagnosis.
Oh, my God.
So this guy, we spend a week up here in Iowa, and we are devastated. Like, what is our world? I'd called some friends in Houston. I know some alternative medicines that have saved a few friends and beat their stage 4 cancers. So I was looking into all that, how to order all that stuff that legally you can't just get off Amazon. And then MD Anderson in Houston is kind of regarded as the greatest oncology hospital in the world. So I called some friends that had ties to MD Anderson and was preparing to tell Brooke, hey, let's pack our bags. We're moving to Houston for a couple weeks or months or whatever that is. And I went back the next week, and we pulled the labs, and the guy's like, well, they've dropped. So, yeah, I don't think it's cancer. And I said, well, did you do a reading? And I don't understand all the medical terminology or what have you, but I said, you do a test that would pick up on like cancer if it was? And he's like, yeah, this one would indicate it for sure, but it drops. So yeah, you don't have cancer. I was like, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So
I would have been like a second opinion immediately. I'd be like, I don't trust anything until I get other eyeballs on this.
And we had Brooke's mom's worked in the blood lab for many, many years. So thankfully we had her, and I can trust her opinion. But yeah, it was, I'll never know how many years that week took off of my life, but there's a sense of kind of confidence and hope, because I've seen other friends beat cancer with alternative medicines now. And going through chemo and all that is such a toll on your body. But we had a less than 1-year-old in the back seat, and our world was about to change. But it was like, maybe that was God saying, hey, you need this wake-up call. Go home. And now we're home. And it's like it all came full circle, and praise God that it was kind of a false diagnosis and it wasn't something certain. I constantly worry about that with Dad being sick so young. His dad died at 61 of cancer. So it's definitely something in the gene pool. But if we live right and take care of ourselves and everything else, I think we can get past that point. It's just a constant worry in the back of your mind that you got to give to God and not worry about every day, and let that debilitate what you can do in this life, but also energize you to say every day counts. Make it count.
No, I love it. As you've kind of plugged back into the local area, I know you mentioned you guys lived on a ranch. Is that kind of the vision for your family here in Ankeny?
Yeah. We'd love to find. We've got 3 horses that are in Cedar Rapids right now in a boarding facility. I'd love to find a little piece of ground that I could build a house and build a mother-in-law suite on for my mother-in-law to stay in and run our horses and a couple cows and be able to kind of have our own little peace and quiet somewhere we can raise Emmy Lou and any other kids God blesses us with out in the country and where they can get their hands dirty. And I just think about the world that we live in today is so different from when we grew up and riding our bicycles to Victory Park and meeting up with the Nagel boys and playing ball all day. And there's people, I still don't know who they were, but we'd eat popsicles in their living room and they didn't have kids. Like, it's weird to me, but like we would go on Oak Drive and like Canyon knew his neighbor and we'd go and eat popsicles at the neighbor's house. And mom and dad had no idea where we were or what we were doing. As long as we come home before the streetlights came on, we were good. Mm-hmm. And today's world, I can never imagine allowing my kids to do that.
Sure.
So getting out to the country and being able to raise some of our own food and just be able to watch the sunrise and the sunset is a big deal for us.
Sure. No, I totally understand. And I think it is interesting just the older I get, the more I want to be plugged in with nature. Because as a kid, you're going to practice, you're going to school, like you're just never outside doing stuff when you're like high school, middle school age, whatever. I feel like the older I get, the more I'm like, get out on the river or get back home. Like my mom lives on a little piece of ground in Danville. So like a little pond, like just hearing the crickets and cicadas and stuff. It's like, I don't get that as much now. I mean, we kind of do now in Polk City, but it's nice to unplug. So I think it's good to have your own little slice of that.
Reminds me, when was the last time you seen a lightning bug? Or like a swarm of lightning bugs?
Probably a couple months ago when I was back home.
Yeah.
Because I'll sit out at night. Everyone will go to sleep, and I just sit out by the fire and I'll just play guitar till like 2 or 3 in the morning because I just love just being out there. And there's usually they're kind of floating over the pond. So that was the last time I saw some.
Oh, and that's just like growing up there. That was everywhere. It was just a piece of our childhood. Where I can't remember outside of Southeast Iowa. I can't remember the last lightning bug I've seen. Mm-hmm. And that's, to me, it's like, that's part of our just peace and quiet nature that just doesn't happen every day anymore. And I'm with you. I like sitting outside on a gravel road where there's not a whole lot of traffic, and you kind of get to reflect and think about how your life is and what you've done in the past to get you to where you're at, and how you're going to catapult from today forward to make sure that you're taking the best care of your family. Sure. That's the best environment to do it in my opinion.
Sure. No, I think that's great. You've had a lot of kind of diverse experience all over the country, different industries, the rodeo stuff, corporations, nonprofit. What has been the biggest advice you would give someone coming right out of college trying to find that thing that they're called to do in life, or the thing that makes them excited to get up in the morning and work? What is that for you, and what advice would you give to people?
I think it's network. Your network is everything. And I'm fortunate enough to have so many great mentors in a variety of different industries that pour into me. And to me, I get up every day to take care of my family, but also to make sure I don't disappoint those who believe in me. And even if you don't have those mentors or you don't have those people pouring into you, there's still people in life that are wanting you to succeed. Don't disappoint them. So get up and go to work and do what you got to do. Take your personal days and invest in your mental health, because that's so important. You've got to be mentally strong to be able to get through the work week, especially in leadership and the roles as a business owner. You've got to look at things differently than just 9 to 5. You don't clock in, clock out. You're always on. And I know you can relate to that. Your wife can relate to that. And if you don't have your mental health in check, you're not going to last very long in that world. And it's a long spiral to the bottom if you do stub your toe, if you're not mentally ready to take on that day. So network, find some good mentors, and always strive to make those around you proud, even though they won't tell you.
No, I love that advice. We talked a lot about kind of how the catastrophe of losing your father really shaped you as a man.
Yeah.
You mentioned he only said, "I love you," and then "I'm proud of you" like once or twice your entire life, which I think a lot of people can relate to with the stoicism of our older generation, where I'm also trying to do that more for my kids and give the things that we never got. Do you think him looking down on you now, do you feel like he's proud of the man you are today, and why?
I think so. And I think it has nothing to do with how much money's in the bank account or what I've been able to achieve or make a difference with. But I think for him, it all comes back to who are you as a human? And I feel like I fall short every single day, but I feel like I get up every day striving to be better than I was yesterday. And that's something that he did, even though he was kind of handicapped by the environment he was around a lot. That's what he tried to do every single day and make the difference. And I think he would be proud. And I think he would regret not saying it more often. That's just not the way he was raised. He wasn't raised where his father told him, I love you and I'm proud of you all the time. And to me, I can't fault him for that. But it makes the times that he did say it just that more special. And the reason I raised my daughter the way I raise her, and when I'm around my nieces and nephews or even friends' kids, being told or telling them that I'm proud of them is just a common occurrence. Like that's how you build this relationship. Dad would never get – I always grew up saying if Dad's mad at you, that's one thing. If Dad's disappointed in you, you've really messed up, and you never wanted to disappoint him. And that's kind of where I want to build myself and the people around me is I want people to show up and look at things not from, oh, that's going to make him mad or whatever. It's like, oh, that's not really living up to who Jeff thinks I can be with my full potential, and have that kind of influence on people in a positive way rather than people always being scared of, oh, God, he's going to be upset or he's disappointed or whatever. It's pushing people forward. Even if you fail forward. So, yeah, I'd say he would be proud of me and my little brother and my older siblings and everybody else back home, and even the kids that he taught through Scouts that really made a difference in his life. I can only imagine how proud he would be of the kids that he saw come through from Tiger Cubs to every Webelos and up into the Boy Scout ranks, of seeing what they're doing in life and how they're raising good families and pouring back into their communities and doing all the things that Dad was trying to instill in them at 7, 8 years old.
Sure. No, I love it. Jeff, we had a great conversation. Make sure if you're still listening to this point, check him out on LinkedIn. That sounds like the place to connect with you. And if is there any like parting wisdom or advice you would give to people if they're wanting to be more like Jeff or figure out kind of where they want to be in life?
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing is just take care of those around you and always remember I learned this at a funeral of a colleague that took his own life, that battled with mental health, but it was that God makes you with a purpose, for a purpose, and because of a purpose, and don't ever forget it.
Love it. Love it. I think no better place to end today. If you've made it this far again, make sure to check out Jeff. We'll put all his stuff in the description box below. If you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, make sure to subscribe. If you're on iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe to the show. And check us out on social media for clips from past, current, and future episodes. My name is Ryan Snod. It rhymes with odd, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace. Thank you so much for watching yet another episode of the Rhymes with Odd podcast. We really do appreciate your support. If you could give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, that makes a world of difference, guys. Also, if you're tuning in on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and check us out on social media. Also, if you'd like to inquire more about our services here at Snod Media Group or learn about doing your own podcast for your own business, you can find us at snodmedia.com. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace.